Thank you all for being here at my talk titled Integrating 360 VR, 3D Printing, and the Undergraduate Classroom. So archaeology is in the digital age. From remote sensing technologies to the use of internet for online instruction and sharing research, today's archaeologists must have some level of digital literacy. This digitization of the archaeological process is raising questions, including those that go beyond what we can know about the past. Today, I examined how to integrate digital approaches to archaeology, namely 360 VR videos and 3D printing in the undergraduate classroom. My aim with this work is to foster active learning through greater sensory engagement. However, I'm fully aware of issues of digital colonialism and escapism that are often associated with the use of new technology in archaeology and other fields. Consequently, I will share my experience implementing 360 VR videos and 3D prints in an undergraduate archaeology course that is also designed to decolonize world history and engage in place-based learning. I'll begin by discussing some of the theory that underpins my approach to active learning in order to contextualize my use of 360 VR videos and 3D printing in the undergraduate archaeological classroom. I will then discuss some of the basics of both media, including their potential benefits and pitfalls. Next, I turn to discussing how I employed 360 VR videos and 3D prints in a 100-level archaeology course that I teach called Ancient Worlds. In addition to covering some of the basics of implementing these technologies in the classroom, I provide a preliminary assessment of the teaching effectiveness of both technologies and media. I do so via anecdotal evidence that includes anonymous student feedback. Last, I provide conclusions and future directions. My approach to active learning builds from a diverse set of works, including pragmatist philosophy, critical pedagogy, phenomenology, and indigenous epistemologies. Without getting deep into the theory, this means that I view education as a relational process. Effective learning engages our embodied subjectivity more than human relationships and can take place at all, or can occur at all times and places. In this talk, I build from the vast literature on active learning to consider how educators can engage the sensory experience of learners. Perhaps I'm not going out on a limb by stating that I firmly believe a major drawback in teaching archaeology at the university level is having to work in a traditional classroom. The archaeological process is intensely physical and collaborative. It engages all our senses, whether we like it or not. Those of you who work in the rainforest and probably elsewhere know what I'm talking about. But the traditional undergraduate classroom removes most of this embodied sensorial experience and replaces it with lecture halls and abstract discussion. I liken it to teaching someone how to swim without getting in the water. It is no wonder that only the most dedicated and passionate students tend to really engage in the classroom on a consistent basis. Not only are students busy with other classes and paid work, but we have taken away the tangible experiences as well as emotions that really make archaeology engaging. Yet, I am a pragmatist. We have to be considerate of ethics, legal codes, safety, finances, and other logistical considerations when working with the archaeological record. I doubt that I'll ever be able to take all of my students on an archaeological excavation, let alone visit the site of Petra in Jordan or to hold Clovis points. Consequently, I sought viable alternatives for fostering active learning through greater sensory engagement and allowing students to experience more of the archaeology we cover in class. 360 VR videos and 3D printing seem to provide just such an opportunity. At the very least, I hope to wow students and colleagues with the use of fancy new technology. 360 VR is a virtual reality experience in which you are provided with the ability to see in multiple directions. For example, imagine you are watching tourists in Vatican City and can decide at any point to turn your head to the right to see the person next to you or to look up to see the afternoon sky. Although 360 VR videos can work solely through your phone, they work best with a set of viewing goggles such as Google Cardboard and MetaQuest, which render the videos in 3D. 360 VR videos are available through various apps and websites, many of which are free, including YouTube. The latter has a lot of free 360 VR content because Google made major investments in promoting this type of immersive experience. Although 360 VR videos engage your vision and hearing to create a sense of being somewhere else, I also wanted students to learn via their sense of touch. To engage their sense of touch, I turned to the use of 3D prints because they provided a viable alternative to obtaining actual artifacts or purchasing replicas for classroom use. 3D printing, otherwise known as additive manufacturing, is a process of creating items by adding successive layers of plastic, metal, or some other material. To start, you need to have a pre-existing 3D scan of an item, which is a whole separate process unto itself. Luckily, there are lots of websites with 3D renderings that are free and that allow you to also download the associated 3D file. The biggest challenge in using this technology is obtaining access to a 3D printer and learning to use its software. The printers tend to run in the thousands, but 3D printers for small, fine-grained prints are becoming increasingly available in the hundreds of dollars range. Luckily, I have access to a 3D printer, a MakerBot Replicator 5th generation, which you see on the screen. And shout out to Loyola University Chicago, specifically the anthropology department, for making this purchase. Although I was excited to integrate 3D prints and 360 VR videos into my classroom pedagogy, I did so with attention to issues of colonialism associated with the use and spread of technology and digital media in today's world. Technological development and access is at the forefront of struggles for decolonization. For example, proponents of open access to 3D scans of cultural heritage claim that it promotes research and access to the world's heritage. Yet this idea is highly problematic when one considers who has digital literacy along with access to reliable internet, and that decisions about heritage are being made by a small group of people, typically in the US and other colonial seats of power. Moreover, the use of virtual worlds and 3D renderings can lead to a form of escapism in which people can detach from on-the-ground realities in the places rendered virtually or the physical location of the viewer. Manipulating a 3D virtual model or 3D print of the Great Pyramids does not require us to engage with the political and economic realities of Egypt, for example. Moreover, there is the potential for the archaeological record to take a backseat to our fascination with the digital world. To address the issue of colonialism and avoid escapism, I integrated 360 VR videos and 3D prints into a course that decolonizes world history, in part by channeling land and its relations as teachers. In terms of learning with the land, this type of pedagogy is perhaps more familiar as place-based learning, which engages the local community or environment in the learning process. According to place-based pedagogy, if you want to learn the principles of biology and make the lessons deeply meaningful for learners, leave the classroom and interact with the local ecology. I implement this place-based approach in my course titled Ancient Worlds. This 35-person course fills quickly with students from a wide range of majors and educational backgrounds. For me, the course provides a prime opportunity to engage students in critical reflection on issues of past and present settler colonialism, including race, racism, gender, heteropatriarchy, land dispossession, and indigenous erasure. I do so with students who might not consider these topics as undergraduates, or for that matter, at any point in their lives. After all, how many of us know people who think that North America is a land without history because history here supposedly begins with the Pilgrims disembarking on the Mayflower? In the Ancient Worlds course, we address settler colonialism and its many constituent threads by thinking about the history and native peoples of Chicago and the US Midwest. In other words, the very place where we are situated as learners. I begin by taking the students outside to sit in front of Lake Michigan and ask them, where do ancient worlds exist? Most refer to places outside of North America and rarely mention Chicago. Why? Over the course of the semester, I argue that settler colonialism and its drive to erase Native Americans has shaped how they think about history. I then expand this frame to show how a Eurocentric perspective generally structures the way students in the US are taught the history of the world, including Chicago. Anything that is seen outside of the heritage and glorification of European colonial powers tends to be downplayed or outright ignored in what the general public learns about world history. It is in the context of decolonizing how we think about history that students experience via 360 VR the sites of Petra in Jordan or Giza in Egypt. We do so while being attentive to ongoing issues of coloniality that pervade the archaeological process and life in the places where we are taking a virtual tour. Likewise, when I hand students 3D prints of Clovis points or cuneiform tablets, we consider the ethics of archaeological conservation and how respect for descendants may mean that outsiders are not allowed to touch the actual remains left by their ancestors. While many students have commented that they appreciate the decolonial component of the course, I wondered how effective 360 VR videos and 3D prints would be at engaging students in the classroom and promoting course learning outcomes. Long story short, 360 VR had a bigger impact, at least initially, than 3D prints. Much of the following is based on comments provided by students taking the course and my own experience. And in terms of 3D prints, students were more interested in learning how to make a 3D print rather than handling one. I could see eyes widen when I mentioned to students that I had access to a 3D printer, but the excitement rapidly abated when handling a 3D printed artifact. Thus, in future courses, I plan to develop hands-on lessons on how to use 3D printers. The 360 VR videos that we viewed through Google Cardboard goggles had an even bigger wow factor. Setting up the goggles and videos took a while, but once students were immersed in the virtual world, the energy of the classroom immediately changed. I heard a lot of wows and whoas and other statements like that. The students that are normally quiet began to loudly narrate their VR experience, while others moved in their seats as if they were actually at Giza viewing the pyramids. It got to the point where I had to remind some students that they were still in the classroom and to be careful with their movements. Basically, don't accidentally smack the person next to you. And so I used 360 VR videos on 3 separate occasions, and the wow factor decreased with each use. Some students eventually opted out of the viewing experience. VR goggles, like regular 3D glasses, requires your eyes to adjust, and for some students, this experience was just too disorienting. Others did not like having large goggles on their head or going through the setup process. Overall, like 3D prints, there was a group of students who really enjoyed the 360 VR experience, some who opted out, and many others who seemed indifferent. I also assessed the potential impact of 360 VR videos and 3D prints via 2 anonymous student feedback surveys. The first is a document I hand out to students at the mid-semester point of the semester, or at the mid-semester point, I should say. So it's a mid-semester review of the course to gauge how things are going. And the second is the end of semester course reviews administered by the university. Although students had plenty to say about the decolonial framing of the history that we engage in the course, had lots to say about the papers they had to write and other components of the course, no student commented on the use of 360 VR videos or 3D prints in either of the assessments, either at the midterm point or at the end of the semester. But it should be noted that none of the forms specifically asked about the use of technology in the classroom. Nevertheless, it is telling that students would comment on their appreciation of decolonial and non-Western perspectives of history, but not the repeated use of new technologies and digital media in the classroom. So, reflecting on my experience with 360 VR videos and 3D prints in the undergraduate classroom, I would say that the results were modest in terms of promoting active learning. The technologies certainly have an initial wow factor, but this generally wears off over time. Moreover, when viewed through VR goggles, 360 VR videos can create a disorienting experience for students. Thus, I do not recommend regular use of VR goggles in the classroom. Nevertheless, 360 VR videos might benefit some students by providing media for visual and auditory learners. Likewise for 3D prints and tactile learners. I'll also have to think more about how to better connect the classroom technologies and media with the learning outcome of decolonizing history. At the moment, my goal has been to consider and address how digital approaches to archaeology contribute to ongoing colonialism. And in this direction, I'm considering adding lessons on colonial history and technology to coincide with the 360 VR and the other digital media we might use in the class. But overall, my work with 360 VR videos, 3D prints, and digital approaches to archaeology is ongoing. So if you're interested, stay tuned for future updates. And thank you very much.